Well, first of all, thank you to both Henry, Dr. Tang, and the Center for China and Globalization, both for inviting me and for putting on this very timely, very interesting session. To pick up where our last speaker left off, with the question of the toxic time that we're in, I am not hopeful that in the short term we're about to exit the kind of tensions that we see in the United States and in China. And so therefore, I think we need to look at the underlying question of how do we continue the relationships during the current period. As you introduced me, I'm probably the only senior international officer actually sitting on a college campus. I sit at Case Western Reserve University, in addition to my national role at the Association of International Education Administrators. So I want to start off by following up on some of Peggy's slides, on some of her information, and try to distinguish a little bit between and among institutions, because not all institutions are the same. While we see that there are fewer Chinese students in the United States, and that's dropped fairly considerably, we also see that at major institutions that we would call R1, Research 1 universities in the US, those are places like Duke, where my distinguished friend, Dr. Simon is, Harvard, NYU, University of Southern California, Michigan, and indeed Case Western Reserve University. We see the number of Chinese students is continuing, and in many cases, it's actually growing. And in the slides that Peggy presented, you also saw that the number of graduate students it actually exceeds the number of undergraduate students, and those students are coming to the R1 research universities. International students, perhaps in general, but certainly Chinese students, the numbers are dropping at the non-flagship state universities, lower ranked universities, and indeed undergraduate students. So the implication of that, it seems to me, is twofold. One is that many top students who are self-pay students, so that would be primarily undergraduate students and master's students, still believe that U.S. education is valuable, and they're coming to these R1 institutions. These, I would think, are students who are interested in working internationally or are interested in working outside of China and see that the U.S. education continues to be valuable. The second type of student that's coming are really top graduate students, those who are coming to get PhDs primarily. The US still wants those students, and I believe that China still wants to send those students here, and that they can come with funds from the government, from the China Scholarship Council. They, I believe, sort of undergird both the academic and the research enterprise, certainly at our universities here in the United States. Again, some of the numbers that Peggy presented, primarily those are science and engineering students, and I believe that both countries still want those students, perhaps for different reasons, but want those students. So even in this era of tension that we see, we still see top students coming to the U.S. So let me shift for 1 second and look at the positives for Chinese students still coming to U.S. campuses. And before this, in preparation for this, I talked with some of our student affairs people, both at Case Western Reserve and in different universities throughout the country, and a couple of thoughts here. One is that the overall experience for Chinese students continues to be good on campuses in the U.S. The universities in the U.S. Try to integrate Chinese students, make them part of campus life. We see them leading organizations, participating, et cetera. They're still able to work in labs, although there clearly are issues with research in certain areas that are sensitive, and I'll discuss that in 1 second. And of course, they come so that they can both understand and appreciate life in the U.S., network with the idea that they may be able to stay here for some period of time and get a real experience, not only as a student, but also after they graduate. And I think that leads me into my next point, which is that at least some policymakers in the United States, and I'd be interested in thoughts from other panelists on this, are recognizing the importance of international persons, particularly students, including students from China. You know, demographics are changing in this country. Fewer people are being born. If we want to continue economic advancement in certain areas in the U.S., it's going to be because we have immigrants, refugees coming into the country. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, in Northeast Ohio, and it's quite clear that even in a fairly conservative state, that policymakers are recognizing the need to bring in people from outside the U.S. to create the kind of economic advancement to continue the ability of people to work. Most people on this Zoom at the session probably know OPT, optional practical training, and students can stay for 3 years if they're STEM students here, and that gives them a lot of experience. And I think Chinese students are taking advantage of that. Finally, I don't think we can end this session without talking about the negatives for Chinese students. We clearly see an anti-Asia, anti-China sentiment among some of the population in the U.S. As the prior speaker talked about, there are clear political tensions, and we're hearing a lot about those, and on college campuses worrying about those tensions, particularly the idea of espionage, defense-related research. We hear a lot about that, and the solution that was presented before is the kind of thing that can go to rebut those issues. And finally, we have to remember that there are certainly perceptions of personal safety and gun violence in the United States. I think a lot of times those are overblown outside of the US. Most of our campuses actually are quite safe, and international students generally, Chinese students in particular, feel safe, but that's not always what gets played out in the media. So I just end by saying that unless there is really some sort of government intervention that says that students cannot travel, cannot come to the U.S. I believe that overall the forces that I've talked about argue in the short term, at least, for students continuing to come to the U.S. and for the relationships to continue growing. And I look forward to the discussion at the end of the session. Thank you.